Technical File 1, Health and Safety and Risk Assessments. Health and safety is very important when it comes to making a production. You always have to make sure that everyone is safe around you. In order to do this, you have to make sure that there are no hazards and all equipment is safely secure. Hazards include electricity. When using the equipment, make sure that all equipment with wires are taped down and that when you're unplugging equipment, make sure that the power supply is switched off so that there is no electrical current going through the wire, which may cause an electric shock. Also, flammable material. You must make sure that you keep this kind of equipment away from any kind of light or anything that will cause fire. Before getting some equipment out of the CLR, you have to make sure you fill out a risk assessment so that you're aware of the hazards may be caused by the equipment used. There are different risk levels. High risk, where immediate action needs to be taken, medium risk, where additional control measures may be required, and low risk, which is acceptable. Here's a chart showing the differences. Different factors may affect risk. For example, people. Some people may have health issues or be very elderly. Therefore, the risks are higher. Also, environment. If the weather is slippery or cold, then also the risks are higher. But if it's sunny and warm and there are no hazards that may cause anything to be damaged, the risk is lower. Technical File 2, Cameras. In these lectures, we learnt about all of the different controls needed to make in footage better quality. I'm now going to go through them one by one. Frames per second is the amount of frames in 1 second. The more frames in 1 second, the more juddery it will be. The less frames in a second will make the footage more smooth and more cinematic. The recommended frames per second is 24 for film and 25 for digital. And as we are using digital cameras, our recommended frame per second is 25. Shutter speed, or in other terms, exposure time, is the amount of time that the shutter is left open. It determines how much light reaches the film. ISO is the speed of film, or in other terms, the amount of light capable of the film to absorb. The higher the ISO, the more light, the lower the ISO, the less light. On a DSLR, the ISO is very sensitive, so you need to make sure that you always use the lower ISO so that the footage is clearer. A higher ISO will result in the footage being much grainier and more noisy. White balance is basically a colour balance. It is there to tell the camera what colours look like. If the camera knows what white looks like, then it will know what the other colours will look like. In the camera lectures, we also learnt about lenses. A camera lens is an optical lens. It's used in conjunction with a camera body in order for all the data on the camera to be stored chemically or electronically. There are two main different types of lenses, prime lens and focal lens. Prime lens, you can't change the focal length, whereas zoom lens, you can change the focal length. There are lots of different features of a lens. I'm now going to go through them. Focal length and aperture. The focal length determines the magnification of the image on the camera, and the aperture determines the light intensity of that image. An f number is the ratio of the focal length to the diameter of the entrance of the pupil. The lower the f-stop, the bigger the aperture, and the more light gets let in. The best f-stop setting is f2.8 or f4. Depth of field is the distance between the nearest and the furthest object. A lower depth of field is where the object nearest the camera is sharply in focus, with the background being blurry. A higher depth of field is where everything is in focus, including the background. Technical File 3, Sound. Sound are basically waves moving through the air. In production, sound is very important as the camera sound is not good enough. So there always has to be a sound engineer with different equipment on set so that you can get a better quality sound. Here are some examples of the equipment that a sound engineer will use on set. A peak program meter, which is used to indicate the level of audio signal. A boom pole, which is basically a microphone on the end of a long pole, which is used to get nearer to an actor when they're speaking, so that the sound is more clear and there is less background noise. A mixer, which uses a 3-pin XLR cable to attach to the mic. The male end normally attaches to the mixer and the female end to the mic. Microphones, which convert sound into an electrical signal which is stored on the recording device to use. There are several different mics that a sound engineer uses. One of them includes an omnidirectional mic, which can pick up sound in all different directions. This can cause a problem as it may pick up background noise. There are also cardioid microphones, which are unidirectional, meaning that they only pick up sound from the front end of the mic. This may be useful for sound engineers when they only want to pick up one sound, as there is very little background noise. There are other simpler recording devices that can be used. Zooms and Eddie rolls can attach to a microphone and then record sound onto an SD card. When on set, always make sure you use a clapperboard to sync the sound with the camera. Otherwise, when it comes to the editing stage, it'll be hard to sync the sound with the film. Technical file 4. Lighting. Lighting is very important when it comes to making production. It makes everything look more attractive. What we see in reality is completely different to what is on the camera screen. And so when we see something that is quite light, on the camera it might actually be dark, and therefore lighting is very useful. Lighting is best when it's not harsh and it's more natural. This is why that we were taught not to use direct light. Use diffusion, reflectors, or bounce the light off the wall to create a softer tone on someone's face. If you don't do this, there will be shadows along the nose, which creates an ugly image. If you want to make someone look more attractive, light them from above, as it takes away a lot of the shadows on the faces. If you want to make someone look evil and sinister, then light them from the bottom. If you have unwanted lights that you don't want to be seen or you want covered up, then you can use a black flag, which is basically black material on a frame. A way of holding lights is using a C-stand, which you can fit the light onto and position it wherever you want it to be. A C-stand is a big metal stand with 3 legs and it's very stable. You can also use a C-stand in order to use the black flag to block the lights. The lights that we normally use in the industry are tungsten lights. If you want to use these kind of lights in daylight, you should always use a blue gel to make the light blue, which is the same light as daylight is. You can also use gels to change the mood of a scene, such as if you want to make the scene warm, use a red or orangey gel. If you want to make the scene more cold and sinister, you can use a blue gel. Technical file 5. Histograms. A histogram is a simple graph that displays where all of the brightness levels contained in a scene are found. Histograms are found on the cameras and can determine the exposure of the footage. The left side of a histogram shows the maximum dark values that the camera can record, and the right side of the histogram shows the maximum light values that the camera can record. The histogram looks like a mountain peak or several peaks. The more of a particular colour in the scene, the higher the peak. Here is an example of a well-exposed histogram. As you can see, the peaks are in the centre of the chart. Therefore, there is a balance between darkness and brightness. Here is an example of an overexposed histogram. As you can see, the peak is to the right, as that is the size of the maximum brightness. Here is an example of an underexposed histogram. As you can see, it's opposite to overexposed, as the peak is in the dark side of the histogram. A colour histogram is an example of the distribution of colour in the footage. Colour histograms are 3 separate histograms, one each for the 3 different channels, red, green and blue. Here is an example of a colour histogram, with the 3 histograms in one. Technical File 6, Post-Production. Post-production is one of the most important stages in a production. It is where everything is fitted together. The editor normally takes a lot longer to edit it than it does to film the production, as the editing stage requires a lot more detail, such as colour grading, adding in audio and just putting it all together. The editor has a lot of control, as they can control the mood of the film. In our lecture, we were taught to use Adobe Premiere, which is one of the leading editing softwares. In this lecture, we were taught how to colour grade. We do this by using the RGB curves and changing them into an S shape, which then you can adjust to the right colour that you want. There are red, greens and blue colours which you can change. Here is an example. Here's me in a warm scene, and here's me in a cold scene. I'm now going to show you a few other things that I learnt in Adobe Premiere. I'm going to show you how to use a razor tool. You can see on this bar here, there's a button called razor tool. Click on that and get to the bit of the movie that you want to cut, and then click on it, and then there's 2 separate parts of the movie now. I'm now going to show you how to do a kind of green screen but with this white background. So first of all, you click on colour key, you drag it over to the footage that you want, and you get this colour sample, and click on the white background, and then you can use this colour tolerance to take it away, and then use edge thinness to make it better, and then edge feather to straighten it out a bit, and so it's like this. We were also taught how to use Adobe After Effects, which is a more technical editing software. It is normally used to create animations or animated things. One of the main concepts in After Effects is keyframing. A keyframe is a drawing that defines any starting or ending point of a smooth transition. Here is an example of keyframing, where I have transitioned moving text.